Sirach 25 and 24. Of the woman came the beginning of sin, and through her we all die. Koholo Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem, Rachachodash. Double honors and salutations on to Yahweh, Wa Yahushai, Wa, the elders and apostles of Great Millstone. The water for your diligence throughout all these years. You're worthy of the title. Shalom to the 144,000 men pursuing this truth at this very hour, the governing body. And shalom to the innumerable one-third consisting of men, women, and children that were ordained to believe on the names of Yahweh, Wa Yahushai, in all truth and sincerity. I am the brother Yazra Allah from the GMS Dallas camp, coming back at you with another lesson, Abaratazah, meaning Lord willing in the ancient Paleo Hebrew. It is edifying unto those who are meant to receive it. Now, this is my second attempt to shoot this video, as the first one I went live, and this message is really grievous onto the wicked as they pull our live feeds and erase our videos and interrupt. So this here lesson is not live. It is pre-recorded, as the last lesson I did, which is the same as this one, seems to have had issues when I went for the playback. Nonetheless, the show must go on. All right, so the name of this lesson is Genesis 3 and 6. Eve accepts the serpent's way of life. And that's why I brought out Sirach 25 and 24. Of the woman came the beginning of sin, and through her we all die. Okay, so that's ultimately talking about all the way back in the beginning. Now, I do want to make this clear. This is not a woman bashing lesson, okay? But rather an eye-opener to the men out here and how important it is to keep the order that the Lord established in the very beginning. Okay, and this is something that Paul made mention of in 1 Corinthians, the 11th chapter. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and grab it here really quick. And Babu Kasha, meaning Lord willing, if you, meaning please, if you have your sheaves, follow along. Pull them out of their sword. Pull their swords, Slakia, out of their sheaves and follow along. Sword being your Bible. That way you know these aren't my vain words or opinion, but the actual oracles of Heavenly Father that are being expounded onto you. All right, that you may learn, that you may grow thereby. All right? We'll get it? Christian followers, Hamashiakim. All right? Followers, the true followers of Yahweh Yahushua. I start at 1. Be ye followers of me, even as I am of Yahushua. This is what Paul is addressing the church of Corinth. All right? And giving them order, because when you go into the history, all right, there was a lot of folly that was going on. So Paul had to come and make things straight via the scriptures and to give the order. All right? Just as today, when you go into the history of Corinth, all right, it was a metropolis, all right, very much like America, like New York, all right. There was a lot of traffic and trade, all right. It was lavish. A lot of the wealthy lived there, all right. But along with that, of course, was a lot of corruption and a lot of wickedness, all right. And our people were too involved in a lot of ways. So Paul came to deliver the good news, all right. Just as we are here today in this latter end time. Now it goes on to say here, now I praise you, brethren, that ye remember me in all things and keep the ordinances as I deliver them on to you. Okay, so again, this is the proper way or order that the Lord established in the very beginning, which he's reminding them. Okay, goes on to say, but I would have you know that the head of every man is Yahushua, and the head of the woman is man. And the head of Yahushua is Yahweh, the Heavenly Father. You see that? So we know when you read throughout history, all right, when we wander from this pathway of righteousness, all right, we ultimately end up in the congregation of the dead, all right, pursuant to Proverbs 12 and 16. All right, so in the beginning in the garden, all right, you have to understand that we had rulership, all right, knowing only righteousness. Now, I was reading this chapter, the beginning, in Genesis, and Genesis 3 and 6 hit me hard because just in that one verse alone holds so much history. It answers so much. Okay, the book of Genesis in itself is a very, very, very heavy book. Okay, it's full of similitudes, it's parabolic, metaphors. It's not at all what we were taught it to be. Okay, not at all, not in the least bit. Okay, and Abaratazah will go into it. So when I was reading it, Genesis 3 and 6, it hit me. There's so much meat here, all right? And it explains what happened, It explains why, it explains the results of it, not only to what happened to us as a nation, but ultimately what happened to the world in the condition that we are in today. Okay, that's why when you go to it, it's called the fall of man. All right, the heading of that, Genesis 3. Okay, so just to reiterate, all right, in the very beginning in the garden, we, Israel, were in rulership. We were known as the sons of God then. All right, knowing only righteousness, which was first established through Adam. All right, when the Lord gave Adam his breath of life, which we know to be what? The knowledge, the wisdom, and the understanding, which separates us from the nations, making us upright in the eyes of the Lord. All right, and this was ultimately a legacy that was being passed down orally, all right, from Adam to Seth, and so forth and so on. Okay, this was far beyond the time when it was actually written on, time before when it was written on tablets and whatnot. Okay, it was passed down, it was oracle, letting you know it was a legacy. It was something that we were to live by. Now we know, as I said, us being in rulership, but we don't know things like how long, right? Or at what point the rulership began, all right? Nor the timeline of the end. Now we believe that once we're in the kingdom, we will know all things, right? But nevertheless, we do know that there was an occasion that took place wherein Adam strayed away from this righteous path and began to listen to his woman. And in doing so, it caused the fall of man. All right, now we are not to say that all this happened in one day, whereas Adam chose a way, all right? And in that moment, when he agreed, the Lord came upon him. No, we know through the Spirit, we have understanding that it all happened in a process of time. All right, before that way of life began to bring forth decay and death into the world. All right, it wasn't something that was instant. Okay, Eve pretty much introduced a way that was contrary to our legacy, to the point wherein Adam started to take on that way of life. Okay, or should I say that way of death, ultimately. Like I said, so we don't know exactly what happened or what took place or how exactly it was brought to the point wherein the Lord intervened, right? But we do know Numbers 14:18 says what? The Lord is long-suffering and of great mercy. So that implies that what? It took a period of time. All right, it was during a process of time before things started to happen in the earth, and the Lord had to pretty much pull up and say, okay, enough. Okay, so as I said, going into this Genesis 3 and 6, we're going to see this simple action brought about monumental effects in the world that we live in up to this very, very day. All right, that's why I, through the Spirit, reading this chapter, and particularly this verse, it hit me and it spoke onto me heavy. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get it here. This is Genesis 3 and 6. And as you can see right here up top, what does it say there? The fall of man, right? So we'll go ahead and we'll get right into it. And it says, right here, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and it was pleasant to her eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. So again, like I said, this book of Genesis is a very, very, very heavy book. So there's literally 3 particular words that I want to go into that are very, very heavy, that but by reading them without the Spirit upon you, you'll read right by them, or you'll think them to be exactly what we thought they are, what we know them to be today, that and that only, not understanding that there are multiple definitions and meanings to words. Beside from the fact that the original scriptures were written, we know the Old Testament being in Hebrew and the New Testament being in Greek. So you have to know a little bit of Greek, you have to know a little bit of Hebrew. Ultimately, that's going into that extra oil because of the men of the Lord, starting with our head apostles of GMS. We were taught to go into the etymology of words, all right, with words, little Greek, little Hebrew, to get the true understanding, to get the whole view, all right, of what's being said. All right, so the words that I want to go into ultimately are the word tree, food, desire, wise, fruit, and eat. Okay, now the first word that we're going to deal with here is trees. Okay, now we know trees in the very beginning, as I said, Genesis is a very heavy book. All right, so the trees are likened to people or nations. All right, and this particular tree that came onto Eve was a man with the characteristics of a sly serpent. All right, the seed of the wicked, if you will. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go here just to back some of these up here with precepts 8 and 24. I'll get right to the point. He says, and he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. You see that? So again, trees are nations or of people. Okay. Now, just as we know, as we said, this was a wicked root, right? A wicked plant, a wicked tree, a wicked nation. This man specifically representing the nation of the wicked. Okay. We also know that they were trees planted of righteousness. Okay. Planted in the garden of Yahweh Bashim Yahushua. Okay. As a matter of fact, in Isaiah 61 speaks on that. So we'll get that just to get the understanding of trees. Isaiah 61 and 3. And it says, to point unto them that mourn in Zion, right, talking about the elect, the men that sigh and cry for all the abominations that are done here, to give on them the beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning. That oil is what? This truth. All right, it's knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. The garments of praise, garments again going back into what? That truth. All right, this covering ultimately of Yahweh Bashim Yahushua. Having the knowledge of wisdom and understanding gives us cover. It protects us. And it says, here's the point, that they may be called what? Trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he might be glorified. You see that? So the trees of righteousness, again, is a metaphor which represents individuals planted by the Lord, all right, who are flourishing in his favor, all right, and being truly righteous people, a righteous nation, okay, made so by the imputation of Yahweh Bashim Yahshua's righteousness to us. All right, the planning of the Lord, planning by the hands of Yahweh Bashim Yahushua. All right, which ultimately is what the church, who are to be never, ever rooted out. Okay, so just to get the understanding. So we'll go into this word also. We'll go back here. Genesis 3 and 6. Let's go into this word food here. All right. Let's see here. Woman, tree, food. Okay. 3978. Okay, we know. All right. And that is H3978. That's ma'akal. All right. Which also goes into makal, which is to eat. Okay. Here, and it says here, victuals. Matter of fact, let's go. Yeah, because the root word is actually eat. The root word of food is eat. All right, and it says a fire, sword, destroy, oppression. All right, by men. Okay, figuratively, to burn up, to consume, to devour. All right, freely, right, to gad abroad. Ultimately, understanding this food, all right, was a way of life that will ultimately contrary to Yahweh Bashim Yahushua and the ways that were established to us. The deed, right? This was an evil deed. Okay, let's go into the Chaldean lexicon here. Let's get some words up out of here. Get some understanding here really quick. All right, food in the bars. To devour, sacrifices said of idols. Wow, you know what that? Okay, that brings me here really quick. We'll go right back to that. Let's go to Deuteronomy 28, and what does it talk about up top? 28 and the consequences of disobedience. All right, so we'll go down here to 38. Start at 37. Let me see here. 1 second. I'm sorry, not 28. It's lucky, my bad. I mean 32. Let's go back here. There we go. 32, 37, and 38. Fact still remains. This is the consequences of disobedience. All right. And he said, and he shall say, where are their gods, their rock in whom they have trusted? Right. So ultimately, this is the Lord. All right. Because what's going on here in this Gardenian pact that Eve is making with the serpent, all right, she's basically sacrificing unto him. All right. She is in agreement. Okay, she's trusting in this man's way, which is contrary to the way that was given unto us. via Yahweh Bashim Yahushua. Goes on to say here, which is the point, which did eat of the fat of their sacrifices and drink of the wine of their drink offerings. Let them rise up and help you and be your protection. Right. You see? So wandering out of the way, all right, that was given unto us. So the Lord is saying, okay, if you want to follow this man's ways, his ways, instructions, this man's way of living, then let him protect you in the day that we're coming into. All right. Ultimately, it's what it's saying overall. Okay. So again, wandering out of the way of understanding. So let's get this word. Go back here. Let's go back into 3 and 6 real quick. All right. So we'll go back here, 3 and 6, and we'll read it again. And the woman saw that the tree, now we know what the tree is, the tree of the nations, right, was good for food, right? Food is the same as eat, right, which was a sacrifice, okay? And it was pleasant to the eyes, and the tree to be desired, okay? So let's get this word here, desired. Desired, 25 and 30. Slaki, before we do that, so I want to go in here in order. Well, you know, we can do that. Let's do this. Let's go to Slaki. Where is it at? When she saw trees of the food, certain eyes, a tree desire. Wise. Let's go into this word wise really quick. I'm just curious. Wise here, which is sakal. Okay, to consider. All right, to teach. Okay, well, we know what the scripture says, all right, about a woman teaching. Okay, to consider, to ponder, to be prudent. All right, 79:19. Let's go down here to the Chaldean. Let me just grab this one here. What's it say here? Circumspect, skillful, to make, to teach. We have self-consider, right? Let's go here. Let's get some of this here. All right, here it says circumspectly here. He put his hands across. Across, crosswise. Wisdom that crosses boundaries or deviates from the straight path. You see that? It says to become wise on one's own terms, especially by violating Yahweh Hashem Yahushua's command, could mean going crosswise from the will of Yahweh Hashem Yahushua. You see that? So this was what was happening. All right, she was being introduced into a way that was contrary, okay, to Yahweh Hashem Yahushua. All right. Scriptures talks about how wisdom of this world is foolishness unto the Most High. Ultimately, because it's going to end in your destruction. Okay, so this is what Eve was desiring. Okay, to attend, to turn the mind to, right, to turn away from righteousness. You see that? This is what she was desiring ultimately. All right. Let's see what else it says here. Teach, be prudent, to appear potent, the word apply to others. Arabic here. Psalm, which is not Neolithic. Jesus, why the explanation. So yeah, a song. Yeah, so ultimately we see what that was, okay? This wisdom was contrary, okay? It was crosswise, all right? It crossed the boundaries that were set, all right, that were given unto us. It deviated from the straight path, as it said, okay? This is what this wisdom ultimately was being brought forth. It was given unto to Eve, or should I say what she desired, okay? So now let's go into this word here, fruit. All right, now we know here, you see, and a woman saw the tree, food in her eyes, the tree desired, make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof. Okay, 65, H6529, peri, it says peri, right? 6529, and it says fruitful, fruits, prudence of the ground, fruit of action. You see, fruit of action. So action meaning to do something. Okay? All right, so when you do something, right, so when you cross boundaries, right, when you deviate from the straight path, that's an action that's taken place. All right, so this food, this sacrifice to this idol unto this man, okay, she sought to be wise, all right, to be true wisdom. And in doing so, this wisdom, so-called, all right, causes her to cross boundaries, to deviate from the righteous path. All right, violating the commands of Yahweh Bashim Yahushua, going crosswise to his will. You see that? As a matter of fact, you know, it brings me up. Let me get this Isaiah. We're just gonna hold that really quick. I'm gonna go here. Isaiah, what is that? 10 and 12, I believe it is, with the Assyrian. Yep. Assyria is Yahweh Bashim Yahushua's instrument, right? He uses the nations to punish us. Okay, we'll get straight to the point here. Isaiah 10 and 12. Wherein it shall come to pass that when the Lord has performed his whole work upon Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, I will punish the fruit of the stout heart, right? Stout meaning prideful, haughty, of the king of Assyria, and the glory of his high looks. Okay, so this was ultimately, this fruit was a way of life. It was proud. It was pride. It was boasting. So this is what was given on to Eve. That's why the serpent said, "You shall not surely die if you eat of this fruit. You will become a god yourself ultimately. You will rise and be exalted above the man." You see, if you cross over, go beyond the boundaries that were set, that Yahweh Bashim Yahushua established in the very beginning. Okay, now we also know in the law world, many brothers have brought that out. There's a term in the law world called fruit of a poisonous tree. Okay, and basically it's a legal metaphor used to describe evidence that's obtained illegally in court. All right, the logic of the terminology is that if the source, being the tree, all right, of the evidence, all right, the evidence itself is tainted, basically meaning anything gained from the tree, being the fruit, is tainted as well. Okay, so this fruit that was, we know, going back to what the trees of righteousness, right, but also the trees of wickedness, okay, in which the serpent came from. So by offering Eve this food, which was ultimately a doctrine, a way that was contrary to the Lord, right? Because the tree itself, his nation, him himself was tainted, so he was giving her something that was tainted, that was corrupt. You see? So now we'll go into this word, eat. We'll go back here. All right, now we'll read it again. Now, when the woman saw that the tree, being the nation, was good for food, right? This was a sacrifice, right? And it was pleasant to her eyes, a tree to be desired, right? We went into that, or we haven't gone into that, but we will. And it says to make one wise. So we went into what wise was, right? That crossing over the boundaries. She was introduced to another way. Okay? You see that? So let's grab this word eat here really quick, which is pretty much the same as food. All right? It's a call. But, you know, I'm just going to bring it out on here on the screen so you can see, again, going back to H397. Okay? To devour, to feed, to consume. Okay? To live. All right? Goes on to say, let me see here. To take one's food, to feast, to live. You see that there? All right. And that goes on here to say, to eat anyone's words, to receive them eagerly. You see that? Going back to food for thought, this doctrine was words that she was offered unto her, and she was eager, she desired them. You see? Which ultimately brought upon what? Death, destruction. It's the first precept we brought out. To eat up, to devour a people, the poor, used of princes who consume the wealth of people, oppressing and impoverishing them. Is that not Esau, Edom, the wicked? Okay, so that goes into what ultimately, in this day that we're in right now, going into what? That wine. Because this is the same wine All right, that was this same wine here. This doctrine is the same wine when you read in Revelation 17:18 that the nations took of and they drank and they were mad. Right? Going back to his philosophies, his democracy. Okay? See, the devil doesn't do anything new under the sun. Okay? And ultimately it leads to what? Leads to the nation's oppression, leads to them being impoverished, right? Consuming the wealth of the people and of the nation. You see, but it all started in the very beginning with Eve. You see, this was a sacrificial banquet that took place, man. That was happening, ultimately, if you can receive it. Okay? So now that we have that understanding thus far, so let's go back. Let's go into the word desire. Desire, 25, H25 and 30. Kamad. Kamad. What is that? Kamad. All right. Delectable thing. Covet. Let's see. Do we have any? I don't have any root on that. So desire. To desire greatly. Right? To greatly. So she greatly desired. This was precious, as it says unto her. To covet. You see? This is something that she wanted eagerly. All right. And it says to covet. Thirst or burn for. To possess, pleasant, agreeable. You see, so offering this way of life, Eve basically agreed. Going back to what? As we mentioned, this was their Gardenian pact between Eve and the serpent. She was in agreement. You see? Let's get some more of this here. Agreeable, pleasant, covet. Something desirable. Ooh, I desire to sit down in his shadow. Wow. What is a shadow? Shadow is an image of something. Like the law. Hebrews 10 talks about the shadow of good things to come. Okay, the law is the shadow of Yahweh Shah. All right. So what was this shadow? She desired to sit in this man's shadow, to sit in this man's image, to bring forth this man's image. If you can receive it. You see, this is heavy, right? Goes on to say loathsome, causing hatred, disgust, repulsive. You see that? Estranged from my wife, of a person no longer close or affectionate to someone, alienated, estranged from parents and family. You see? So this way of life, all right, which is contrary, crossed the boundaries that Yahweh Shah set. Okay, she desired this way of life instead, because the ways that Yahweh Shah set forth, they were disgusting, repulsive unto her. She hated them. She desired to rule herself. Okay, and this is the spirit of Esau Edom. It says, estranged from my wife, a person no longer close or affectionate to someone. She separated herself. Alienated, estranged from parents and family. Ooh, reminds me of what? Let's get it. Psalms 58 and 3. Because this talks about the wicked. This is a characteristic of Esau Edom, 100%, if you can receive it. Let's go ahead and get this. 58 and 3. We'll get straight to the point. The wicked are estranged from the womb. Right. The spirit of Esau was estranged, right, from Isaac and Rebekah. From the womb, right? Was he not fighting with the righteous seed within the womb, right? He was not against, all right, the righteous ways that Rebekah and Isaac set forth. He was estranged from the families of the earth, right? Being that wicked, being in his lot, if you can receive it. He says, and they go astray soon as they be born, speaking lies. So the serpent spoke lies to Eve. All right, this is the spirit of Esau Edom today. Ultimately, Eve was drawn away, all right, from righteousness by her own lust and desires to rule over her man. She was tempted and she failed. Okay, James, the first chapter, talks about that. As a matter of fact, let me get it. Around 12 or 13, I think it is. We'll just start right up here at top. 14, Khan. But every man, meaning mankind, but every man is tempted when he is drawn away from his own lust and enticed. You see that? So this is what the serpent, or the seed of the wicked, did. He enticed Eve with another way that would exalt her over her husband. You see? It goes on to say, then when lust has conceived, it brings forth sin. And sin, when it is finished, bring forth death. You see that? Going back into what? The precept we first brought out. Of the women became the beginning of sin, and through her we all die. You see? That tempting, all right, that enticement that the serpent brought onto her, okay, she bit it, she ate it, she went along with it, she chose to live by it. You see? This is what the serpent does. Going all the way back to Sirach 25 and 24. Now, let's go back here to Genesis 3 and 7 here. We're just going to get a couple more, and then we're going to go ahead and close out. So now that we've established, all right, what these are and what it's talking about, okay, in Genesis 6, and the woman saw the trees, all right, meaning the nation, the wicked nation, in this particular verse, that was good for food, right? It was a sacrifice, right, to eat, a way to live by, and it was pleasant to her eyes, and a tree to be desired, right? She desired to cross over, to go beyond the boundaries that were set, to be contrary unto Yahweh Shem Yahushai, to make one wise, right? We went into that word wise, right? Crossing over, deviating, right? And she took of the fruit thereof. We know about the fruit, the doctrine, the way of life, okay? And she did eat. She chose to live by it, and gave unto her husband also with her, and he did eat, Adam, and he chose to. He followed the woman. You see? It's just that simple. All right? This is ultimately what happened. Okay, so let's go down here, Genesis 7. And the eyes of both were open, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together, and they made themselves aprons. Right, so they became naked, meaning what? They were out the covering of the Lord, which is likened to garments. Okay? His righteousness covers and protects us ultimately, man. Okay? So when we wander out of that way of righteousness, as they did, they became ashamed and attempted to hide themselves among the nations by way of other religions, philosophies, brought unto them by way of the serpent. That's what those aprons are talking about. Okay? As a matter of fact, let me grab this from Revelation 16. Let's back that up. Precept upon precept, right? 16 and 15. Here. And it says, behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watches. And what? And keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked, and they see his shame. You see that? So the garments are what protect us, okay? And without them, it's a shame, okay? We are no longer being that, created to be that righteous seed, right? We've fallen, basically. All right? We've fallen into decay, into death. And this is ultimately spearheaded by Eve. And Adam followed. You see? So we know after this act was committed, the Lord did what? He issued forth judgment unto all three of them. Okay, matter of fact, let's go down here to, let's go back here to Genesis 3 and I want to say 15 or 16. Okay, we'll just start here at 16. Because as I said, this chapter is very, very heavy. 3 and 16, and it says, unto the woman, he said, all right, this is the judgment, all right, for disobeying. I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception, and in sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. And goes on to say, and unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened, right? Because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree, right? You listen to your woman, okay? And you begin to live by this wicked doctrine, all right? Of which I commanded thee, saying, thou should not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. All right, so this one single act of disobedience brought death, decay, and destruction into the world. all because he followed his woman. He strayed away from the order. You see? Goes on to say, and in sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. As a matter of fact, so we see we have that understanding. So let me just grab this 3:16 Genesis in the NLT, so you can get a better understanding of what this says. Right here. Then he said to the woman, I will sharpen the pain of your pregnancy, and in pain you will give birth. And here's the point. And you will desire to control your husband, but he will rule over you. You see that? So this is the mindset of our woman today, starting with Eve, the so-called black woman. All right, but ultimately it will be to no avail, because we know that when the kingdom is set up, the Lord's order will be established again, but forever. All right, so you brothers, all right, hearken unto the men of the Lord, starting with our apostles. All right, listening to what's being said. All right, take back your manhood, man. All right, if she's unruly, if she's not willing to get in order, then get away from this woman. All right, many men have been put to death following after a woman. It's just that simple. All right, and today Esau has used this same snare upon our women today, pushing the idea that the woman is more important. The woman holds more value than the men, arguing that we came from the woman, which is a lie. Let's get it. Going back to what Paul said. See, this is why, when you have the understanding, this is why Paul went in on the church of Corinth, man, because of the things, the folly that was going on there. Okay, and this is what he saw. Men, there were simps. Men were simping back then. Okay, 11 and 8. Let's get straight to the point. It says, for the man is not of the woman, but the woman of the man. You see that? In the GNT, it says, for the first man didn't come from the woman, but the first woman came from the man. You see that? That's plain on tables right there. That doesn't need any explanation. It means what it says. It says what it means right there. Right? And we know that this is the order. Okay, as a matter of fact, let's go to 1 Timothy. I'm going to back up one or two more, and then I'll close out. This is 1 Timothy 2 and 13 or 14, I think it is. Here it goes right here. 1 Timothy 2 and 13. For Adam was first formed, then Eve. You see that's all that? Well, we are the barriers. No, you are likened to incubators, women. You carry the life seed. Okay? If you look at a man's sperma under a microscope, you'll see living cells moving that have life in them. Okay? We are the seed carriers, and we plant that seed within you. And you nurture it, give birth to that seed. But ultimately, the gender of that seed is determined by the male. The lineage of that seed is determined by the male. So you so-called black women, you can hearken all you want, but guess what? You can't bring forth a child of God. Any rod or sperma that goes onto you, that's the seed or the lineage you're going to bring forth. He can look like a nigga, or she can look like a nigga, a so-called black woman, a white woman all day. But if her father is an Edomite or an Ishmaelite, all right, or an Elamite, that's what that lineage is. So you can hearken all you want. At the end of the day, we don't need the black woman to bring back the children of Israel. We don't need you. So I suggest you humble down and you get in order, because Isaiah 4 and 1 is coming. Isaiah 32 and 9 is coming. Isaiah, the 3rd chapter, is coming. Okay? This has to be understood. All right? Goes on to say here in 14, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in transgression. You see? Why? Because the woman is the weaker vessel. And for those who got a problem with that, let's just go to the scriptures and see what the scriptures say. Like I said, this wasn't about trying to bash a woman. This is more a message to the men. All right? Because the women are proud and haughty as it is. So we're looking for real men here, the elect men. All right, so we can get up out of here. All right, we don't need the Eve to listen. She don't want to listen, so be it. Let her go. All right, 1 Timothy 3 and 7. And it says, likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge. According to who? Giving honor unto the wife. Here's the point. As unto the weaker vessel. You see that? So this is why the serpent didn't approach Adam, but rather Eve. All right. He knew she was the weaker vessel of the two. But Adam was held responsible. Why? Because he strayed away from the order that was given and followed Eve into sin. You see? You see? So, brothers, now is the time to show yourselves men. All right? Get your house in order. Stop chasing these women. Look, understand something. Anything a man chases, he will never possess. Okay? The woman was not your beginning, brothers. Therefore, she should not be your end. All right? Now, with that being said, I want to give all honors and praises to Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim Rakakwadash. Shalom.